Warning, this video contains spoilers for Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 and assumes you know what an image friend is. Howdy, I'm going to be covering a bunch of things in this video, but I want to start with the Roaring Knight's identity in case you aren't familiar. I believe that Des, Noelle's sister, is the knight. There's mountains of evidence for this, but I want to begin with some counter evidence for Rudy and Carol being the knight, because I've seen a lot of people confidently believe it. So first, let's start off with Carol Knight. To me, she's an obvious red herring. She's cold and scary, has antlers and a big katana. She has to be the knight, right? Well, the big problem with Carol being the knight is that we can leave her mansion, go straight to the first sanctuary, Dark World, go through one room, and the knight appears in front of us. How could Carol get there that fast without us seeing her? How would she know when the coast was clear and she could leave without being seen? Because we have the option to take forever getting there or rushing straight to it. Barring some entirely unhinted at secret tunnel, I don't see how she could possibly get there in time. Now, let's talk about Rudy Knight. My big problem with this is that it just doesn't really make any sense narratively. Rudy is set up to be the opposite of Carol. She's cold and controlling, he's warm and permissive. They balance each other out. Every time we see him, it seems like his top priority is Noelle. Why would he intentionally worsen his illness at the cost of what he cares most about? Another problem is that whatever the knight is, it's clearly not a normal lightener. The black shard from its sword is entirely intransient. It doesn't change forms between worlds, and we know that the knight is physically strong enough to drag Undyne to the shelter because we are shown her struggling and still conscious as the knight leaves the Dark World. That's all I have to say for those theories. Now I want to address what I see as the best argument against Des being the knight, which is all of the unused dialogue in each chapter's code. It's pretty obvious that this lost person is Des. She's the only one who's been set up as lost. So how could she be the unused text girl and the knight? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. Each chapter, we get more text from the lost person. Let me read chapter 1's. Where am I? Hello? Anyone? Is anybody out there? Someone! Anyone! Can anyone hear me? It's dark. It's so dark here. Someone, anyone, if you can hear me, say something, please. This dialogue is clearly from when Des first disappeared, but that happened long before the start of the game, meaning that all of the unused dialogue in the code could be from before she became whatever the knight actually is. I actually also have a fun idea that maybe the reason why her being lost only happens at the start of the game is because wherever she is, time works closer to the real world. So she got lost a long time ago during the narrative, but in reality, she got lost the same time the game was released, which is when the unused dialogue happened. This is just a fun idea, I don't think it's certainly true. The next thing I want to cover is the knight's connection with stars and Azrael. The knight's attacks have the dark/star element, and it uses stars in a couple of attacks, specifically its full screen attack, which is actually extremely similar to Azrael's Hyper Goner attack. Here's a comparison. Pretty similar, right? Black Knife and Burn in Despair are also very similar. Des and Azriel also both have stars covering the walls of their room. The only important non-dreamer who's been hinted to have a connection to Azriel is Des. I really think there should be no doubt that she is the knight. Azriel's retainer is in her room. Supposedly Des wiped Noelle's tears with his jacket, meaning she would have been wearing it, along with having his sweater in her closet. Although I wouldn't discount the possibility it's actually Kris's sweater instead. There's also this line from the Ribics battle dialogue that hint at Azriel being utterly crestfallen after Des's disappearance. A lost and lost and lost girl. A crying and crying and crying boy. Thanks to Redditor u/this ain't my username 12, whose comment reminded me of that line while I was researching. Now that we've established who the knight is, I want to talk about who the angel is. I want to ask you a question. Who do we play as in Deltarune? We control Kris, but we are specifically not Kris. We're the soul, the red heart-shaped object. Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. The soul is us, and we are the angel. There's a lot of evidence for this. The angel is specifically stated as being baseless, like the vessel. In the basement section, the soul enters an angel doll. Alvin specifically mentions how the angel is watching from above, and there's a cut line of dialogue from Clover saying the same thing. And we literally watch from above, as that's our perspective in the game. Father Alvin also says to let the angel's power light your way, and light is the power of the soul, and this line he says also ties into the lyrics of Raise Your Bat, which we'll dive into more later. When you buy the thorn ring from Spamton G. Spamton, he actually calls you the angel. The prophecy says the angel, banished, will finally meet with its desire. I think this means that at the end of the game, you have to stop playing. And by playing a game, you are trying to reach the ending. So, the ending would be your desire, and you meet with it when you are banished by finishing the game. If all of that didn't convince you, then let me ask, who else could the angel be? The only other possible candidate I can think of is Noelle, because she has a lot of angel imagery. And that is true, but what would be her desire? Really, the only things we know she wants are a relationship with Susie and to find Des. How would she get those if she was banished? I have a different idea, which I've heard many people say, which is that all the angel imagery she has could be setting up us possessing her in the weird route. I want to acknowledge the possibility that many of the roles in the prophecy seem like they could be potentially taken by different people depending on the route, so it's entirely possible that if we are the angel, we aren't the angel in every route. I've also heard some people say Gaster's the angel. I don't really know anything about this, so if you believe in that, please leave a comment and inform me. We're going to talk about hand imagery and the soul now. Back to that same sequence as the soul being in the angel doll, we hear Susie and Noelle talk about the severed hand from Blood Crushers 2. And I think that the same scene is setting up both the soul as the angel and as hands. Think about what Noelle and Susie are talking about. Noelle says she hears something in the basement, and it's the soul playing music. But Susie says, damn, I hope it's not the severed hand, and then talks about how the protagonist of Blood Crusher 2 loses their hand and then hears music down in a basement and then gets attacked by the severed hand when it goes down there. Later, when they're in the basement, Susie asks Noelle what she would do if the severed hand attacked her, and she says she'd just die. To me, this sounds like an allusion to the weird route, where when the soul, the severed hand, pressures her, she just completely gives in. Everything she did until she was put into a trance was her doing. She could have chose not to do any of it, but she just accepted it. At the end of the basement sequence, we get this interaction. Okay, where the hell's the breaker, though? Right? If we keep taking so long, the severed hand is gonna touch us first. Oh my gosh, this just brushed up against my leg. What the hell is that? It's an angel doll. They're scared of the severed hand touching them, and then the angel doll, holding the soul, touches them. There's also the prophecy panel describing the first hero. The first hero, the cage with human soul and parts, and the image for it is the soul and a pair of hands. I think all this hand imagery that's connected to the soul could have a lot of different meanings. I mean, hands are how we interact with the world. I know Toby Fox has personally really struggled with hand impairments, and I can really relate on that front because I've had a similar experience having to use like voice to text and foot switches. So I'm not entirely sure what all the hand imagery is because there's a lot of ways it could be. It could be like how you interact with the world. It could be like a hand controlling, manipulating. It's really something to think more about. And here's just some speculation, but I have to wonder if before the beginning of the game, does Kris have a soul? If souls are sort of like hands, then if Kris was out without a soul, it could be like an allusion to having like a hand impairment, which could maybe explain like their depression and such, but I don't know. That's just blind speculation. There's actually one other thing they call the soul in this sequence, a mouse, which is interesting because a mouse can be like a cursor, and we'll talk about that later. Now, if the soul is supposed to be hands, then it would make all the foreshadowing of Kris losing their hand take on a new meaning. Not of literally losing their hand, but of losing the soul. Now that we've talked about all that, I want to get to the meat of it. I want to talk about the knight's motivations, and to do that, let's investigate its actions. First of all, it doesn't just want to cause the roaring. It could have easily made a bunch of dark fountains and spawned a bunch of titans, and there would have been nothing we could do. It needs Undyne for some reason. The knight could have easily grabbed both Toriel and Undyne, but I think it's pretty obvious that it wasn't really trying to get Toriel, considering how it tries to use its slow tractor beam instead of just grabbing her and fleeing like it does easily at the end of the chapter with Undyne. So it created the dark fountains of chapter 1, 2, and 2 of the 3 fountains in chapter 4, all of which have a very adventurous tone, which is starkly contrasted by Kris's dark fountain in chapter 3. I want to stop here to analyze this a bit further. Rousey told us that darkness patterned off the memories of loved ones only appear in specific darknesses, and Gerson shows up in both of chapter 4's fountains that the knight made. He was actually Des's teacher, so it makes complete sense that he could show up there. But isn't it interesting that dark fountains are shaped by the creators? In chapter 3, we learned from Ram that King and Queen already existed a long time ago when Kris and that girl played pretend. Isn't it strange that Ram hides the identity of who he's speaking about? Noelle isn't mentioned a single time in chapter 3, besides the flashback with her silhouette. And to me, it wouldn't really make sense to hide it if it was supposed to be Noelle, as that's not really a big deal. But if it was Des, it would actually be huge. It'd tell us that Kris and Des were closer than we thought, and it would make King, Queen, and Tenna their collaborative creations. Think about the chapter 2 Dark World. It's a bright city with lots of lights, and the moon is a baseball. Noelle talks about how Des always said she'd take her to a place like this while she's walking on a bunch of keys that spell out December. It would add a lot of weight to the story if Des and Kris had collaboratively made Queen, and then Queen was in Des's Dark Fountain, because Queen is obviously, like, hugely connected to Des's mom, Carol. Like, she's an overbearing and controlling leader. Did Des intentionally make the Dark Fountain with queen to give Noelle character development? During Undertale's 6-year anniversary stream, Toby Fox said this about King. I mean, I think that fountain definitely changed his behavior for sure. And in Chapter 2, Sweet Captain Cake say it wasn't till that dark fountain showed up that she started going into overdrive. What was the knight doing in Chapter 4? It doesn't accomplish anything at all. You'd think that if it had a physical goal of any kind, there'd be something, anything to hint at it. But the only thing the knight does in the whole Dark World is possibly dole out a shadow crystal and mess with the heroes. So with all of this in mind, what does the knight actually want? I think if the knight was simply just trying to fulfill the prophecy, it wouldn't need to be so cocky and brash or do things like make Queen and Gerson to give the Lightners character development. So my theory is that the knight's goal is to be the antagonist. It's putting on a show for us, intentionally giving us a heroic journey, reviving Gerson to be a mentor figure, summoning a titan to give us a foe to fight. It probably knows the soul can save and reload, so it wouldn't have to worry about if we would survive, since we could always retry if we failed. I want to take a short break for a second to talk about Cucumber Quest. This will have some spoilers, so be warned. It's a webcomic made by GGDG, who has worked on Deltarune. It's a story about Cucumber, a young bunny born to a heroic lineage, destined to seal away the Nightmare Knight, who gets resurrected every 5,000 years. But it turns out this is the 100th time the Nightmare Knight has appeared. And the Nightmare Knight isn't so much of a bad guy. He doesn't want to win. He just puts on a show because his powers are based on how much people fear him. And without his power, the minions he has created and grown to care for would disappear. Pretty interesting, right? I don't think this is one-to-one the Knight's motivations, but I think there's a connection. First of all, Toby Fox has made a song for the Nightmare Knight, and it has both the amalgamates and the Knight's motif. I'm not going to play it here because I think you should go listen to the whole thing in its entirety. It's linked in the description. And a couple of the other characters are kind of similar to the characters in Deltarune. There's Almond, Cucumber's sister, who's similar to Susie. At first, she just wants to have an epic quest. She doesn't care about talking it out with the enemies. They're supposed to be 4 fighting after all. And Princess Nautilus is supposed to guide the hero, but she only tells them stuff when it's narratively convenient. Although for her, it's not willful, it's because she's got a bad memory. Now, it's not related to anything, but this castle is also interestingly similar to Castletown, which is fun. So I think the knight is purposely playing the role of an antagonist and creating a narrative for the heroes to go through. We know that because it kidnapped Undyne that it has some kind of goal besides that, but it's really hard to speculate on what that could be. If I had to throw out a random guess, I'd say sacrificing her for her determination, because that's the one thing that's very specific to Undyne. She has a lot of determination. But if December is the knight, then why would she be doing this? I think we can find the answer. Let's analyze the lyrics to Raise Up Your Bat. So let's start with the obvious part. The singer is Des, and she's singing to Kris. This is the only thing that makes sense. Come follow me into the dark, with your heart as the arc which shall shine you the way. She was the first into the dark, and your heart being the arc that shines the way is talking about how the soul is how they navigate the darkness, and how light is the power of the soul. Because I'm with you in the dark, I'm not sure how to interpret this line other than that she's trying to reassure Kris that she's with them. With your heart as my mark, which shall guide you the way through the waves. It seems like Des might be the reason why Kris has the soul. About the waves and arc parts, there's a lot of connection between darkness and water in this game. Dark fountains are like fountains. I've also heard that in the Japanese translation of this song, there's even more water imagery talking about rowing and stuff, but I can't confirm that. Well, those are the lyrics that most people talk about, but there's something that we're missing. The first line of the song. When the demon heart is crying. What on earth is the demon heart? It's the first mention of this, and also the only mention so far. Well, it's really dark here, but I'm gonna try and shed some light on this. I just hope I don't misstep. So if we're the angel, the opposite of a demon, and the heart is the soul, then shouldn't the demon heart be another otherworldly agent controlling someone? I think the reasons for the knight's actions are because Des doesn't have full control. She's a mirror to Kris. I mean, just look at how similar they act. Credit to u/longjumping-bit9359 for the image. There's also the third section of Shadow Mantle, where there's a shadowy creature that moves parallel to Kris, and their true sprite is a black deer, only turning to a generic enemy due to an argument in the code that's normally on, labeled Toriel. There's also this thing in the knight's chest, which could totally be the demon heart. I didn't notice this till I watched Des_Daedalus' video about the demon heart. I believe she made the first video about it. I found it while I was researching for this video. There's also, interestingly enough, a bunch of references specifically to the knight and its hands. Jewel says, "The hand of the knight is drifting forward soon. The queen returns, and hell's roar bubbles from the depths. From now on, a nightmare will awaken in your hearts. In the shadow of the knight's hand, lighteners, can you stop it?" Queen says, "The roaring night, today it deigned to create this world. Reaching its long hand to the sky, it coursed its will into its blade and made thrusting the fountain from the earth." King says, "Soon you will meet your demise by the knight's hand." The knight's prophecy panel is actually very similar to the first Heroes. It features two hands and a knife. When you try to backtrack at the end of the third sanctuary, there's dialogue that plays saying that there's a hand just perfectly out of view that blocks you from proceeding. And at the end of the dialogue, a near inaudible guitar pluck sound effect plays, the same one as Des's guitar. Credit to YouTuber Half-Bred Chaos, they're the one who I learned this from. When it's preparing its full screen attack, the battle text says, "The knight's hands glow a strange color." If the soul has been connected to the idea of hands, like with the severed hand, then maybe all of these references to the knight's hand could be alluding to the demon heart. Before we continue, I want to state that I don't think Des is 100% puppeted by the demon heart. I think she absolutely has some agency and control, just like Kris does over us. So what's the demon heart then? I think it's Nightmare, otherwise known as Friend. I think she has a friend inside her. In the Shadow Mantle game, you can find 3 hidden rooms lined up from left to right. One with Friend's eyes, one with text from Nightmare, and one with Friend's mouth, in that order. In the mansion's basement in Chapter 2, the first place you can find Friend, the song Digital Roots is playing, and the final area of Shadow Mantle has the song Bits Roots playing, which is just the 8-bit version of Digital Roots. At the end of Chapter 4, the knight literally makes the Friend laugh noise. This, with the fact that the Nightmare boss summons friendlings, leads me to believe that Friend and Nightmare are one and the same. Would it really make sense for there to be 2 different shadowy creatures pulling strings? Wait, pulling strings? These are the lines from Spamton G. Spamton's song, Big Shot.
Think of something from the inside of the phone. A hand is placed to your bowel bone. It pulls strings and makes them ring, and fill your heart just red hot.
Fingers coming from inside the phone. A hand that waits until you're all alone. It pulls the strings and makes them ring until your heart gets red hot. Based on Friend being a cat, Spamton's element being puppet/cat, and Spamton's glasses resembling Friend's eyes, I think it's safe to say that Friend is who he is talking about in these lyrics. And let's just take a look at how Friend appears in Rousey's explanation about Darkners. Doesn't it look like a hand? And Burning Eyes, the track that plays when you fight Nightmare, is just 8-bit Black Knife. Though I do think this could actually be Kris's theme and not Nightmare's because of the track title and Nightmare's fight dialogue. But regardless of that, that dialogue also supports that Kris and Friend may be working together on some level, the way it says we both have work to do. So I'm not really sure where to go from here. There's a lot more speculation I could do, but it's already really, really dark here. And going any further, we could end up in pure darkness. So I want to call it quits. I really love any thought or input you have on this, and I want to give thanks to a bunch of people. But first, I did say we'd talk more about mice way earlier in the video. So I'll just quickly say that in Mike's room, you control with a mouse. And remember, in the basement sequence, they call the heart, they call it a mouse, a severed hand, and an angel. I think that it's tying mice and hands and cursors together. I think Mike is probably just Friend. Also, if I'm totally wrong about the demon heart and what it is, my only other guess would be that it's Kris's soul from before they got the player soul, but I'm pretty sure my idea makes more sense than that. So off to the credits. First, thank you to my friends Ari and Aubrey Rose Baker, who endured my obsession and encouraged me to make this video. Also thanks to Des_Daedalus, who made, as far as I can tell, the first video about the demon heart and encouraged me to make my own when I left a comment. I want to thank everyone who has ever done any speculation at all. I've been seriously obsessed and I've devoured so many thoughts and opinions from the fan base and from people making videos. Stuff like this is really a group effort. And I want to thank Toby Fox and his team for making such an amazing work of art that has inspired me and so many others. And thank you if you've made it this far in the video. If this gets any reception at all, I might make a companion piece for it where I talk about some of my other, maybe more unhinged ideas. Goodbye!